Conor McGregor's story begins in a small, unassuming town where the world had yet to know his name. Born on a crisp spring morning, his arrival into the world was marked by a loud, determined cry, as if he had something to prove right from the start. His parents, humble and hardworking, didn't have grand visions for their son. Life in their quaint town revolved around simple routines, close-knit communities, and dreams that rarely reached beyond the horizon. But for young Conor, the horizon was never enough. From an early age, it was clear he was different. There was a fire in his eyes, a restless energy that couldn't be contained. As a child, Conor was the type to climb the tallest trees, race his friends across open fields, and dream of far-off adventures when the world around him seemed too small. His quick wit and charm made him a favorite among his peers, though his rebellious streak often landed him in hot water with teachers and neighbors alike. "That boy will either change the world or burn it down trying," an elderly neighbor once remarked, shaking her head as Conor sprinted by with a mischievous grin. Conor's childhood was a blend of mischief and curiosity. He loved asking questions, sometimes too many. Why is the sky blue? Why do birds fly but we can't? Why do rules even exist? His inquisitive nature made him a handful, especially in school, where he struggled to conform to the rigid expectations of the classroom. Teachers saw him as a challenge, but they also recognized his sharp mind. When engaged, Conor could light up a room with his insights, but when bored, he was a disruptive force, leaving behind a trail of chaos and laughter. Despite his knack for causing trouble, there was no denying Conor's potential. His parents worked tirelessly to provide him with opportunities they never had, enrolling him in extracurricular activities and encouraging his natural talents. He dabbled in everything from sports to art, excelling in some, failing spectacularly in others, but always giving it his all. Through it all, one thing became clear: Conor was never content with mediocrity. Whether on the football pitch, sketching in his notebook, or debating with friends, he pushed himself to the limit, determined to stand out. As Conor grew older, his ambition became more focused. While many of his peers settled into predictable routines, Conor was drawn to the unpredictable, the challenging, and the extraordinary. He began to see the world not as it was, but as it could be, a place full of opportunities waiting to be seized. But with ambition came conflict. Conor's relentless drive often clashed with the expectations of those around him. Teachers urged him to focus on his studies, friends begged him to take it easy, and his parents worried about the risks he seemed so willing to take. High school became a battleground for Conor's competing desires to fit in and to stand out. He excelled in subjects that piqued his interest, earning the respect of teachers who once saw him as a troublemaker. But his fiery temper and refusal to back down from a challenge often led to confrontations. Fights, both verbal and physical, became a part of his story, each one leaving a mark on his reputation and psyche. Some saw him as a hero, others as a villain, but everyone agreed on one thing: Conor McGregor's was impossible to ignore. One particular incident during his final year of high school would prove to be a turning point. A heated argument with a classmate escalated into a full-blown fight, drawing the attention of the entire school. Conor walked away, bruised but unbroken, his reputation as a fearless and fiery individual cemented. That day, as he stood in the principal's office, facing suspension, Conor made a promise to himself. He would channel his energy, his passion, and his defiance into something meaningful. But what that something was, he had no idea. The years that followed were a roller coaster of highs and lows. Conor tried his hand at various jobs, each one teaching him lessons that would shape his character. From working in construction, where he learned the value of hard work, to brief stints in sales, Where his charm and quick thinking shone, Conor was a sponge, soaking up experiences and knowledge. But no job seemed to satisfy his hunger for more. He wanted a purpose, a calling, something that would allow him to leave his mark on the world. As Conor navigated the complexities of adulthood, he found himself drawn to a path that promised both glory and danger. It was a world where strength, strategy, and resilience reigned supreme, a world where he could prove himself on the grandest stage. But it was also a world rife with challenges, setbacks, and enemies. The decision to step into this arena would test Conor in ways he could never have imagined, pushing him to his physical, mental, and emotional limits. And so, as the chapter on his early life closes, a new one begins. Conor McGregor stands at the edge of a journey that will define him, his past a mix of triumphs and trials, his future uncertain but full of promise. What lies ahead will be a story of grit, determination, and the unyielding pursuit of greatness. But before he can rise, Conor must first face the shadows of his past and the battles that await him. What would drive a man like Conor to risk everything? What secrets does his journey hold? And who will stand in his way as he fights to carve out his legacy? Stay tuned to uncover the untold chapters of Conor McGregor's extraordinary life. As Conor McGregor stood at the crossroads of his life, the weight of his choices began to press down on him. He wasn't a man who shied away from pressure, but even he couldn't ignore the sheer magnitude of what lay ahead. For someone who thrived on challenges, the thought of failure was a constant whisper in the back of his mind, growing louder with each passing day. But Conor had never been one to let fear dictate his actions. If anything, fear was his fuel. He spent hours reflecting on the path that had brought him to this point. His childhood had been a whirlwind, but it was also the foundation of everything he had become. He thought of the countless times he had pushed boundaries, tested limits, and refused to settle for less than what he believed he deserved. He thought of the faces that had shaped his journey, his parents, who had worked tirelessly to give him a shot at a better life, his friends, who had stood by him even when his temper flared, and his rivals, who had unknowingly driven him to dig deeper, fight harder, and never back down. But Conor's memories weren't all rosy. For every moment of triumph, there was a shadow of regret. He remembered the arguments that had spiraled out of control, the bridges he had burned, and the opportunities he had squandered. He remembered the hurt in his mother's eyes when he came home bruised from another fight, and the disappointment in his father's voice when he confessed to skipping school yet again. These moments haunted him, not because they defined him, but because they reminded him of what was at stake. He couldn't afford to fail, not now, not when everything he had worked for was on the line. As the days turned into weeks, Conor began to immerse himself in preparation for the next phase of his journey. He wasn't the type to leave things to chance. If he was going to succeed, he needed to be ready for whatever challenges came his way. He threw himself into training, pushing his body to its limits and then some. He studied his craft relentlessly, absorbing every piece of knowledge he could find, dissecting strategies, and analyzing his competition. Every step he took was calculated, every move deliberate. Conor was building himself into a weapon, one forged in the fires of determination and hardened by the trials of his past. Despite his laser focus, Conor couldn't escape the growing tension in his life. The closer he got to his goal, the more the pressure mounted. People around him began to take notice. Some were supportive, cheering him on and offering words of encouragement. Others were skeptical, questioning his choices and doubting his abilities. "You're chasing a pipe dream," one old acquaintance had scoffed. "Do you really think you have what it takes?" Conor didn't respond. He didn't need to. He had learned long ago that the best way to silence doubt was to prove it wrong. But the voices of doubt weren't just a kernel. Late at night, when the world was quiet, Conor found himself grappling with his own insecurities. What if he wasn't as strong as he thought? What if he failed? What if the risks he was taking led to nothing but disappointment? These thoughts gnawed at him, threatening to unravel the confidence he had so carefully built. Yet, even in his darkest moments, Conor found a way to push forward. He reminded himself of the countless times he had defied the odds, the battles he had fought and won, and the fire that had always burned within him. One night, as he sat alone, staring out at the city lights, Conor felt a strange mix of emotions: fear, excitement, and a sense of destiny. He knew that the path he had chosen wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, heartbreaks, and moments when he would question everything. But he also knew that the greatest rewards came from the greatest risks. And Conor McGregor was never one to play it safe. The days ahead would test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. There were people waiting in the wings, ready to challenge him, to push him to his limits. There were secrets he had yet to uncover, mysteries that would force him to confront the truth about himself and the world around him. And there were battles, both physical and emotional, that would leave scars, shaping him into the man he was destined to become. As the city buzzed with life around him, Conor took a deep breath, his mind racing with anticipation. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the clock was ticking. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready to face it head-on. But as he prepared to take his next step, a single thought lingered in his mind. What if this was only the beginning? What if the challenges he had faced so far were nothing compared to what was coming? Conor's journey was far from over, and the road ahead was filled with uncertainty. But one thing was clear: his story was only just beginning. And the world had no idea what was about to hit it. Conor McGregor could feel the weight of the moment creeping into every corner of his mind. Each day brought him closer to a destiny he could almost touch, but didn't fully understand. He had worked tirelessly to prepare himself for what lay ahead, but there was a gnawing uncertainty about what it would cost him. Success always came with a price, and Conor wasn't sure if he was ready to pay it. The turning point came when a figure from his past resurfaced, threatening to upend everything he had been building. Marcus O'Shea had been a name Conor tried to leave behind. They had grown up in the same neighborhood, but their paths had diverged sharply. While Conor had fought his way out of the chaos of their childhood, Marcus had embraced it. The two were polar opposites, yet their stories were forever intertwined. Marcus had always been a step ahead in their younger days, stronger, faster, and more cunning. He thrived on dominance, and for years, Conor had lived in his shadow. There was no surprise when Marcus reappeared, his presence like a storm cloud on the horizon. He wasn't there to cheer Conor on or offer support. Instead, he brought with him a challenge that was equal parts personal and professional. "You think you're ready for this?" Marcus had said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Let me remind you where you came from, McGregor. Don't think for a second you're better than us." His words cut deeper than Conor wanted to admit. They brought back memories of a time when he was smaller, weaker, and desperate to prove himself. But Conor wasn't the same person anymore. He had grown, hardened by his experiences, and driven by a purpose far greater than Marcus could understand. Still, the confrontation rattled him. Marcus had always been a force to reckon with, and his sudden reappearance wasn't just a coincidence. He had his reasons, and Conor knew better than to underestimate him. As if Marcus's return wasn't enough, Conor found himself grappling with another unexpected twist. Amelia, someone who had once been close to him, suddenly re-entered his life. Amelia had been a grounding presence, during some of Conor's most tumultuous years. She had believed in him when few others did, seeing potential in him even when he couldn't see it himself. But life had pulled them apart, and they had drifted in different directions. Her reappearance brought a mix of emotions, hope, guilt, and a sense of unfinished business. Amelia wasn't the same person Conor remembered, just as he wasn't the boy she had once known. She had her own battles, her own scars, and her own reasons for reaching out. Their conversations were charged with unspoken truths, each one peeling back another layer of the past they had shared. Amelia's return wasn't just a coincidence either. Her presence was a reminder of the life Conor could have had if he had chosen a different path. As Conor navigated these personal entanglements, the external pressures mounted. His growing notoriety meant that every move he made was scrutinized, every misstep magnified. The whispers about him were growing louder, and not all of them were kind. Rivals, doubters, and opportunists emerged from the shadows, each with their own agenda. Some sought to ride his coattails, while others aimed to bring him down. The more he fought to rise above it all, the more it seemed like the world was determined to drag him back. Conor found solace in his training, pouring every ounce of frustration, anger, and fear into the hours he spent preparing for the battles ahead. The gym became his sanctuary, a place where the noise of the outside world faded, and all that remained was the sound of his own determination. But even there, the tension followed him. Whispers of Marcus's plans, Amelia's struggles, and the challenges that lay ahead swirled around him, impossible to ignore. The nights were the hardest. Alone with his thoughts, Conor couldn't escape the weight of it all. The past he had tried so hard to leave behind was clawing its way back into his life, and the future he was chasing seemed more uncertain than ever. Yet, in the midst of it all, there was a flicker of hope, a belief that he could overcome the odds, that he could rise above the chaos and carve out a legacy that would stand the test of time. But Conor also knew that hope alone wouldn't be enough. The battles ahead would test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Marcus was lurking in the shadows. Amelia's presence was stirring emotions he had long buried, and the world around him was watching, waiting for him to either rise or fall. The stakes were higher than ever, and the path forward was anything but clear. Yet, despite the uncertainty, Conor felt a spark within him, a fire that refused to be extinguished. What Marcus had planned remained a mystery, but Conor could sense that it wasn't just about rivalry. There was something deeper, something that Marcus wasn't saying. And Amelia's return? It felt like more than a coincidence, as if her reappearance was tied to something greater than either of them could yet comprehend. The stage was set, and the pieces were moving. Conor McGregor was at the center of it all, a man caught between his past, present, and future. The battles ahead would demand everything he had, and then some. The days grew heavier as Conor McGregor pushed himself harder than he ever had before. The air around him felt charged, as though the world itself was bracing for something monumental. Marcus's presence lingered like a shadow he couldn't shake, and Amelia's return had stirred feelings he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Every piece of his life felt like it was teetering on the edge, the balance so fragile that even the smallest shift could send everything crashing down. Conor couldn't shake the memory of his last encounter with Marcus. The way he had spoken, the intensity in his eyes, it wasn't just about proving a point. There was something personal, something buried deep that Marcus was carrying with him. Conor knew better than to underestimate the weight of a grudge, especially when it came from someone like Marcus. But no matter how much Conor tried to focus on his training, Marcus's voice echoed in his head. It wasn't fear. Exactly, it was more like anticipation. He knew their paths would cross again, and this time it would be different. This time, everything was on the line. Amelia, too, had become a constant presence in his mind. Their conversations were layered with meaning, every word carrying unspoken emotions and unfinished business. She seemed torn, caught between wanting to help him and trying to shield herself from whatever storm was brewing around him. Conor could see the worry in her eyes, hear it in her voice when she spoke about his choices. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Conor," she had said one night, her voice soft but insistent. "You're more than this fight." But Conor wasn't so sure. To him, the fight wasn't just about proving himself, it was about reclaiming something he felt he had lost. It was about showing the world and himself that he was capable of greatness. He didn't know how to explain that to Amelia, didn't know how to make her understand that this was about more than pride. It was about survival. As the days turned into nights and back into days, the tension in Conor's life became almost unbearable. The world around him seemed to move faster, the noise growing louder with each passing moment. News of his upcoming challenge began to spread, drawing attention from all corners. Some saw him as a rising star, a symbol of grit and determination. Others dismissed him as a hothead, a reckless dreamer chasing something he could never catch. The chatter didn't bother Conor, but it was impossible to ignore. Everywhere he turned, it seemed like someone had an opinion about him. And then there were the whispers about Marcus. The rumors were vague, but persistent, each one hinting at something darker lurking beneath the surface. Marcus wasn't just showing up to settle an old score, he had a plan, and Conor was at the center of it. The thought sent a chill down Conor's spine, but he couldn't afford to dwell on it. If Marcus wanted a fight, Conor would be ready. The tension finally boiled over one night when Conor found himself face to face with Marcus once again. It wasn't planned. It never was with Marcus. He had a way of showing up when Conor least expected it, as though he thrived on catching him off guard. This time was no different. Marcus appeared out of the shadows, his expression unreadable, but his presence unmistakably threatening. "You've been busy," Marcus said, his voice low and measured. "Training, making a name for yourself. I've been watching." Conor squared his shoulders, refusing to let Marcus see even a flicker of doubt. "Good," he said. "Then you know what's coming." Marcus smirked, but there was no humor in it. "Do I? Or are you the one who doesn't have a clue what you're walking into?" The conversation was short, but the tension was electric. Marcus left without a fight, but the encounter left Conor more determined than ever. If Marcus wanted to play games, Conor would show him he wasn't someone to be underestimated. But beneath his defiance, there was a flicker of unease. Marcus's words hung in the air, heavy with implication. In the days that followed, Conor pushed himself to the brink. His body ached, his mind raced, but he refused to let up. The stakes had never been higher, and every part of him was focused on the fight ahead. Yet, as the day drew closer, the doubts began to creep in. What if Marcus was right? What if Conor wasn't ready? Amelia noticed the change in him, but she didn't push. She simply stayed by his side, her presence a quiet reminder that he wasn't alone. But even she couldn't silence the storm raging inside him. Conor knew he was on the brink of something monumental, but he also knew that the hardest battles are often fought in the mind. As the night before the fight approached, Conor found himself alone, staring out at the city lights once again. The weight of everything, Marcus, Amelia, the fight, his own expectations pressed down on him, threatening to crush him. But even in the darkness, there was a spark of defiance, a refusal to give in. The stage was set, the players were ready, and the world was watching. Conor McGregor was about to step into the fight of his life, and nothing would ever be the same. But as he took one last deep breath, He couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The city buzzed with anticipation, an almost tangible energy crackling in the air as the day of the fight loomed closer. Conor McGregor felt it too, a pulse of adrenaline that both exhilarated and unnerved him. He had prepared for this moment, for what felt like a lifetime, and yet something about the way events were unfolding left him on edge. His every instinct told him there was more to this fight than he could see, more than just a clash of skill and will. The weight of Marcus's cryptic words and Amelia's quiet concern lingered in the back of his mind, unresolved and persistent. Conor woke up on the morning of the fight to find a message waiting for him. It was from Amelia, short and direct, but loaded with urgency. "We need to talk. Now." Her words stirred something in him. Amelia had been careful not to intrude too much in his preparations, always mindful of the pressure he was under. For her to reach out like this meant something significant had happened. Without hesitation, he grabbed his keys and headed out, his mind racing with possibilities. They met at a quiet spot just outside the city, a place where the chaos of the world seemed to fade away. Amelia was already there, pacing nervously. When she saw Conor, she didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You need to know something," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Marcus isn't playing fair." Conor frowned, a surge of frustration bubbling to the surface. "What do you mean?" "He's always been like this, Amelia. This isn't news." Amelia shook her head, her expression grave. "No, Conor. This is different. He's been digging into your past, looking for ways to get under your skin. He's not just trying to win, he wants to destroy you." The words hit Conor like a punch to the gut. He had always known Marcus would go to extreme lengths to get what he wanted, but this felt personal on a level he hadn't anticipated. "What did he find?" he asked, his voice low but steady. Amelia hesitated, her eyes searching his face. "Something about your family. Your dad, specifically." She paused, as though trying to gauge how much to reveal. "I don't know all the details, but Marcus is planning to bring it up publicly. He wants to humiliate you, Conor. He wants to break you before you even step into the ring." Conor felt his chest tighten. His father had been a complicated figure in his life, a man of quiet strength, but also deep flaws. There were things about his past that Conor had chosen to leave buried, not out of shame, but out of a desire to move forward. If Marcus had uncovered those things, it could change everything. For a moment, Conor said nothing, his mind spinning with a mix of anger and dread. But then he straightened, his jaw set with determination. "If he thinks that's going to stop me, he's dead wrong," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "I've fought too hard to let him win like this." Amelia looked at him, her expression a mix of admiration and worry. "I know you're strong, Conor. But this isn't just about the fight anymore. He's trying to get inside your head, make you doubt yourself." Conor nodded, the fire in his eyes burning brighter. "Let him try. He's about to find out what I'm made of." But even as he spoke the words, Conor couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Marcus wasn't one to play all his cards at once, and if he was willing to go this far, there was no telling what else he had up his sleeve. The fight wasn't just about skill or strategy anymore. It had become a battle of wills, a test of who could endure the most without breaking. The hours leading up to the fight were a blur. Conor tried to focus on his routine, to drown out the noise and center himself, but the tension was palpable. As he stepped into the arena, the roar of the crowd was deafening. The energy was electric, a mix of excitement and anticipation that seemed to vibrate through every inch of the space. And then, just as Conor was preparing to step into the ring, the second twist revealed itself. A video began playing on the massive screens above the arena. It was grainy, old footage of a man Conor recognized instantly, his father. The crowd hushed as the video played, the sound of his father's voice filling the arena. The footage was spliced with commentary, twisting the narrative into something dark and damaging. Conor's heart pounded as he watched, his emotions a mix of fury and heartbreak. He knew what Marcus was doing, trying to rattle him, to throw him off balance, but the sheer audacity of it was staggering. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, waiting to see how he would react. For a moment, the world seemed to stop, the weight of the moment pressing down on him like never before. But then, something shifted within him. Conor straightened, his gaze locking onto Marcus across the arena. There was no fear in his eyes, no hesitation, only a burning resolve. If Marcus thought this would break him, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. Conor McGregor wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for his family, his legacy, and everything he had worked for. And he wasn't about to back down. As the announcer called his name, Conor stepped into the ring, the weight of the world on his shoulders, but a fire in his heart. The crowd erupted, the noise shaking the walls of the arena. This was it, the moment everything had been building toward. The stakes had never been higher, and the tension was unbearable. But as Conor faced Marcus, the storm swirling around them, he knew one thing for certain: he was ready. The bell rang, signaling the start of the fight. Crowd erupted in a cacophony of cheers, the roar of the arena almost deafening as Conor McGregor and Marcus O'Shea squared off in the center of the ring. Conor's heart pounded, but his focus was razor sharp. He had spent his entire life preparing for moments like this, and despite the chaos that had surrounded him leading up to this moment, there was one thing he knew for sure: he was ready. Marcus wasted no time. He came out strong, throwing wild punches aimed to unsettle Conor, to test his resolve. The first few blows grazed Conor's guard, but he stayed composed, his body moving instinctively with the rhythm of the fight. He knew Marcus's game. It was all about intimidation, all about creating doubt, but Conor refused to give in. Every strike from Marcus seemed to fuel the fire within him, reminding him of the journey he had come through, the battles fought not just in the ring, but in his life. This wasn't just about pride. This was about proving he could overcome anything. The first round was brutal, a flurry of punches and counterpunches, both men fighting for dominance. Conor's thoughts flickered back to the video that had played just moments before the fight, the footage of his father that had rattled him. It had been a calculated move by Marcus, designed to unsettle him, to drag him back to a past he had tried to bury. But as the sweat dripped from his brow and his muscles screamed with exhaustion, Conor realized that his father's legacy wasn't something Marcus could control. It was his to define. The second round came with more intensity. Marcus was relentless, his attacks coming in rapid succession, each one aimed to break Conor's spirit. But Conor had been through worse. He had faced obstacles that had seemed insurmountable, and now, in the heat of battle, he saw things more clearly than ever. The crowd's roars faded into the background as he tuned into his every movement, every breath. He blocked, he countered, he moved with precision. And when the opportunity arose, Conor struck. It was a clean shot to Marcus's midsection that knocked the wind out of him, sending a sharp gasp from his lips. But Marcus wasn't done. His face contorted with rage, and he came at Conor with renewed fury. The fight wasn't just about skill anymore. It was a war of wills. Conor knew that if he let his guard down, even for a second, Marcus would take advantage. The tension reached a boiling point as the final round loomed closer. Both fighters were bruised and battered, their bodies pushed to the limit, yet neither was willing to back down. Conor could feel it. He was so close, but the question still loomed. Could he finish this? Could he put everything on the line for one final push? The crowd was in a frenzy, And as the final bell rang to signal the last round, both men squared off, exhausted but determined. Conor's mind raced, but his body responded without hesitation. Marcus came at him, but this time Conor saw it all the opening he'd been waiting for. As Marcus lunged, Conor sidestepped, his footwork flawless. He delivered a blow that landed clean and fast, right on the side of Marcus's head. The impact reverberated through the arena, and for a split second, everything seemed to slow down. Marcus staggered, his legs giving way beneath him. He fought to stay upright, but it was too late. Conor moved in for the final strike, a powerful punch that landed square on Marcus's jaw, sending him crashing to the canvas. The arena fell silent for a heartbeat, then erupted into chaos as the referee stepped in to call the fight. Conor McGregor had done it. He had won. But even as the crowd's cheers filled the arena, Conor couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. He had won the fight, but it wasn't over. As he stood there, bloodied but victorious, he noticed something odd. Marcus wasn't moving. The referee checked his pulse, his face grim, and Conor's heart sank. The man he had just defeated, the rival he had battled with everything he had, wasn't getting up. The arena went still, the cheers quickly turning to murmurs of confusion. Conor stood frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Had he? No, he couldn't have. He had only been defending himself, only doing what was necessary to win. But as the medics rushed in, Conor's worst fears were confirmed. Marcus was unconscious, and there was a sense of urgency in the way the medics moved. It was then that the unexpected twist hit. As the paramedics tended to Marcus, one of them pulled Conor aside, their expression grave. "You need to see this," the medic said, holding out a phone with a live feed from backstage. Conor's stomach twisted as he looked at the screen. It was a video, one he hadn't seen before. It was a recording of the fight, but something was wrong. There, in the shadows of the ring, was someone Conor hadn't expected to see, Amelia. She was talking to someone, her face a mixture of fear and determination. The person she was speaking to was obscured, but Conor's blood ran cold as he realized who it must be. He had been so focused on Marcus, so consumed by the fight, that he hadn't seen what was happening behind the scenes. Amelia, the person who had been there for him through everything, was involved in something much deeper than he could have ever imagined. The video revealed her involvement in a deal with an unknown figure, someone with power and resources beyond anything Conor had encountered. As the realization sank in, the roar of the crowd began to feel distant. Conor's victory had come at a cost, one that hadn't yet fully revealed itself. And as the tension in the arena continued to build, one truth became clear: this was far from over. The fight in the ring was nothing compared to the battle that was about to unfold in the shadows. Conor's mind raced as he processed the scene playing out on the phone screen. Amelia, the woman he had trusted more than anyone, was caught in something far more complicated than he had realized. She had always been there for him, standing by his side, offering support when he needed it the most. But this was something else entirely. His stomach churned as he replayed the footage, looking for answers, but the more he watched, the more confused he became. The person she was speaking to, the deal she was discussing, it wasn't just about business or strategy. There was a darker undertone to it, something that threatened to undo everything Conor had worked for. For a moment, he considered confronting her right then and there, demanding answers, but the weight of the situation was too heavy. The medics were still attending to Marcus, who had been knocked out cold from the final punch. Conor's heart weighed with guilt, but he knew deep down that he had done what was necessary. This wasn't just about the fight anymore. It was about survival, both in the ring and outside it. He had to think clearly. Without wasting another second, Conor excused himself from the medics and made his way backstage, the phone still clenched tightly in his hand. He couldn't wait any longer. Amelia had to explain herself. He needed to understand what had happened, how everything had gone from a simple rivalry to a web of deceit and manipulation. The hallway backstage was eerily quiet, and as Conor rounded the corner, he saw her standing there, waiting as if she knew he would come. Amelia's face was pale, her expression unreadable. She was holding herself together, but Conor could see the tremor in her hands. She had known he'd find out. You? Conor's voice was thick with emotion. He couldn't bring himself to say anything else. The confusion, the betrayal, it all came rushing to the surface. His thoughts were a chaotic mess, but one thing was clear: he needed answers. Amelia met his gaze, her eyes full of sorrow. Conor, I never wanted you to find out this way, but I couldn't keep hiding it. Conor's grip on the phone tightened. What is it, Amelia? What have you been involved in? She let out a slow breath, as if gathering the strength to speak. It's not as simple as you think. Marcus, he wasn't the only one trying to destroy you. There's a bigger picture, one I got caught up in without even realizing how deep it went. Conor took a step forward, his voice rising. What do you mean? What is this? I trusted you, Amelia. You were supposed to be my ally. She closed her eyes briefly, her lips trembling. I didn't ask for this, Conor. But Marcus is just a pawn in something far bigger. There are people in this business who will do anything to control the narrative, to control the outcome. They knew you were a threat, and they knew how to manipulate me to get close to you. Conor's blood ran cold. Who are these people? Amelia shook her head, her eyes welling with tears. I don't know all the details, but they've been pulling strings from the very beginning. The video of your father, the personal attacks, everything, it was all part of their plan to destabilize you. They used Marcus to get to you, and they used me to keep you in the dark. A silence fell between them as Conor absorbed her words. It all started to make sense now, the pieces clicking together like a twisted puzzle. The fight with Marcus, the sudden pressure he had been under, the way everything had escalated so quickly, it was all part of a bigger game. A game that Conor had unwittingly become a part of. He took a step back, his mind reeling. So what now? What do we do about this? Amelia wiped her eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, Conor. I didn't want any of this. I wanted to help you, but I got pulled in too far. I couldn't say anything. I was too scared. But now that you know, you have to be careful. They're not done with you. Conor clenched his fists, the anger building within him. I've been careful my whole life, Amelia. Maybe it's time I stop playing by their rules. Amelia looked at him, her expression softening. You don't understand, Conor. They're dangerous. These people, they won't stop at anything. They'll use anyone, even me. For a moment, Conor felt a pang of sympathy for her, but it quickly dissolved into determination. You're right, but I didn't come this far just to let them win. I'll take this fight to them, wherever it leads. Amelia seemed torn, as though she wanted to say more, but words failed her. Conor could see the fear in her eyes, the fear that had held her back all this time. But now that the truth was out in the open, there was no going back. With a heavy heart, Conor turned and walked away from her, his mind set on the battle that awaited. He had fought in the ring, but the real war was just beginning. The world he had once known, one of glory, fame, and championships, was crumbling around him. And the people who had orchestrated this manipulation weren't going to stop until they had destroyed everything he held dear. In the days that followed, Conor gathered what little information he could. He spent sleepless nights piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. Marcus, though incapacitated for the moment, would eventually recover. But Conor knew that Marcus was just a tool, a means to an end. The true forces behind this scheme were much more elusive, their reach far greater than he had ever imagined. But Conor was no stranger to adversity. He had built himself from nothing, risen above every obstacle, and now, more than ever, he knew that he couldn't afford to back down. He couldn't let them win. The tension continued to build as Conor dug deeper, uncovering more clues that led him closer to the shadowy figures pulling the strings. But as each lead brought him closer to the truth, it also revealed more questions. Who were these people? What did they want? And why had they chosen him as their target? In the end, Conor discovered that the true mastermind was someone he never expected. It was someone from his past, someone who had always been there in the background, watching, waiting. The shocking truth sent ripples through his entire life, shaking everything he thought he knew about himself, about his journey, and about the people he trusted.